Imagine holding your newborn in your arms, feeling her tiny heartbeat against your chest. And then your own mother steps in, takes her away, and tells you she belongs to someone else. That's exactly what happened to me. Please stay with me until the end, because what started that day changed my life forever. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 27, and I live in Ohio with my husband Ryan, who's 31. We've been through a lot together, job losses, medical bills, and nights when we didn't even know if we could afford groceries. But after years of saving and struggling, we were finally expecting our first child. We dreamed about this baby every single day. I have an older sister, Claire Dawson, 34. She's been married to Mark for over a decade, but they've never been able to have children. For years, Claire has carried that pain, and I've tried my best to be there for her. But her sadness often came out as bitterness toward me. She could be manipulative, making me feel guilty for things I couldn't control. Our mother, Margaret, always favored Claire. She saw her as the golden child, while I was just extra, the spare, as she once called me when she thought I couldn't hear. There were times she'd make strange comments, half-jokes, about how if I ever had kids, I should let Claire raise one. I always brushed it off as her twisted sense of humor. When I went into labor 2 weeks early, Ryan rushed me to the hospital. The contractions were intense, my heart was pounding, and all I could think about was meeting our daughter. Margaret insisted on being there for support, and I thought maybe for once she meant well. The delivery was exhausting. My body felt like it had been through a war, but when they placed my baby girl in my arms, everything else faded. She was perfect, tiny fingers, soft hair, and the most beautiful little face I had ever seen. Ryan stayed beside me, holding my hand, until he stepped out briefly when a nurse needed to discuss some paperwork with me. That's when it happened. My mother leaned over me, smiling in a way that didn't feel warm at all, and said she wanted to introduce the baby to her aunt. Before I could say anything, she gently but firmly took her from my arm. I thought it was fine for a moment, just a grandmother holding her grandchild. But then she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "Sweetheart, this is Claire's baby now. You know she deserves to be a mother more than you." I froze. My body was still weak, my mind spinning. At first, I thought she was joking in some cruel, hormonal timing way, but her face told me she meant every word. And that's when I saw Claire walking into the room, eyes shining, not with tears of joy for me, but with the kind of happiness you have when you finally get what you think you deserve. The delivery left me drained, my body aching and my mind hazy. Hours of contractions, the fear that something might go wrong, and the overwhelming rush of finally hearing my baby's cry had pushed me to my limits. I held her against my chest, breathing in that new baby scent, my heart so full it almost hurt. Ryan leaned down, kissed my forehead, and whispered that he was stepping out to speak with the doctors about some follow-up care. I nodded, still lost in the warmth of the moment. That's when my mother, Margaret, walked over with a strange, almost triumphant smile. "I'll just introduce her to her aunt," she said casually, reaching for the baby. I hesitated for half a second, but exhaustion clouded my thoughts. She was my mother. I didn't imagine she would do anything harmful, so I let her take Sophie into her arms. But when I reached out to take her back, Margaret's expression hardened. "Sweetheart," she said, in that falsely sweet tone she used when she wanted to get her way. "This is Claire's baby now. You know she deserves to be a mother more than you." For a moment, I just stared at her. The words didn't even register right away. Surely she didn't mean that. Surely this was some twisted attempt at a joke. "Mom, give her back," I said quietly, my voice shaky. But she just held the baby closer. "Don't be selfish, Emily. You know what Claire has been through. She's waited her whole life for this. You can have another someday, but she can't." That's when Claire walked in. She was already crying, but her tears weren't for me. They were for the baby she was looking at like she'd already claimed her. She reached out, and Margaret handed Sophie over without a single glance at me. Claire cradled her, smiling through her tears as if she had just given birth herself. "Mom, what is wrong with you?" My voice was louder now, my chest tightening with panic. "She's my daughter. Give her back to me." Margaret glared at me like I was the unreasonable one. "Emily, stop making a scene. Family sticks together. You promised years ago you'd help your sister. This is the right thing to do." I could feel my blood boiling, my hands shaking. "I never promised to give her my child," I yelled, trying to sit up despite the pain tearing through my body. Claire avoided my eyes, rocking Sophie gently like she belonged to her. That's when Ryan walked back in. His smile faded instantly when he saw the scene. Claire holding our baby, my mother standing between us. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but Ryan didn't wait. "Give me my daughter. Now." His voice was sharp, cold. The tension in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. And for the first time, I realized this was only the beginning of a fight I never saw coming. The tension exploded so quickly that I barely had time to process what was happening. Ryan was standing beside me, demanding they hand Sophie back, while my mother and Claire clutched her like they were protecting her from. My voice cracked as I shouted for my baby, the sound raw and desperate. The commotion drew the attention of 2 nurses, who rushed into the room. "All right, everyone, calm down," one of them said firmly. She gently took Sophie from Claire's arms, ignoring the protests, and carried her toward the nursery. "She's going to be fine, but she needs a quiet space right now." Watching my daughter disappear down the hallway, even for a moment, felt like my heart was being ripped from my chest. I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. "This is insane," I muttered, my eyes locked on my mother. Margaret crossed her arms, her face twisted in disapproval. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Yelling in a hospital like some unstable person? You're making the whole family look bad." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Embarrassing the family? You tried to steal my child." My voice was rising again despite the lump in my throat. Claire jumped in, her voice trembling, tears running down her cheeks. "Emily, you promised me. Years ago, you said you'd help me be a mother no matter what. You told me you'd do anything." Her words hit me like a slap. I remembered it. A night almost 8 years ago, when she had just found out yet another round of IVF had failed. We'd been sitting on the couch, a bottle of wine between us, and I'd wrapped my arms around her as she sobbed. I had said, "I'd do anything to help you." At the time, I meant I'd be there for her, that I'd support her through the grief. "Not this. Never this." "That was a figure of speech, Claire," I said through clenched teeth. I wasn't offering to hand over my baby. Ryan's patience snapped. He stepped forward, his voice low but dangerous. "If you don't leave right now, I'll have security escort you both out." Margaret gasped like he'd just threatened her life. "How dare you speak to your elders like that? We're trying to fix this in a way that's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" Ryan's voice cracked with disbelief. "You mean best for you and Claire? This conversation is over. Leave." Margaret's expression hardened into pure hatred. She grabbed Claire by the arm, and together they stormed out, muttering under their breath about how ungrateful and selfish I was. The moment the door closed, the silence hit me like a wave. My body felt heavy, my chest aching, my eyes stinging with tears. I had just given birth, and instead of joy, all I felt was shock, rage, and a deep, hollow betrayal that I knew I would never forget. Bringing Sophie home should have been the happiest day of my life. Ryan and I drove slowly, as if every bump in the road might hurt her, the tiny car seat tucked safely in the back. I kept turning to check on her, unable to believe she was finally ours, really ours. We had agreed on her name before she was born, Sophie Grace Carter. It felt right, gentle and strong at the same time. But even before we could settle in, the tension started. Margaret and Claire showed up at our doorstep the very next morning without calling. They were holding gift bags stuffed with baby clothes, blankets, and bottles. At first, I tried to be polite. After all, they were family. But when Claire insisted on taking Sophie into the other room so they could have bonding time, I felt my stomach knot. Ryan didn't hide his irritation. "This isn't a good time," he said firmly, taking Sophie from her arms. Claire's smile faltered, and Margaret shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "We're just trying to help," she said, as if she was the victim here. It didn't stop there. Every other day they came back, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, always unannounced. Margaret would bring little toys or blankets, and Claire would act like she was Sophie's second mother, cooing and rocking her until Ryan or I stepped in. One afternoon, I came out of the kitchen to find Claire in the nursery, rearranging Sophie's clothes and humming like she belonged there. That was the breaking point for Ryan. The next day, he installed new locks on the doors and told me we'd be changing them again if we had to. But cutting them off physically didn't stop the damage. Margaret started telling relatives that I had changed my mind about letting Claire raise Sophie and that I was breaking her sister's heart. She told anyone who would listen that I was selfish, unstable, and didn't understand what family sacrifice meant. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At the grocery store, neighbors who had once stopped to chat now gave me tight, uncomfortable smiles. At church, people glanced at me like they were trying to figure out if the rumors were true. Even some of my friends started pulling away, unsure of what to believe. I felt cornered in my own life, like no matter where I went, someone was judging me. Ryan kept telling me to ignore them, to focus on Sophie, but it wasn't that easy. I had just become a mother, and instead of feeling supported, I felt like I was standing in the middle of a storm, one my own family had created. Still, every night as I rocked Sophie to sleep, I held her a little tighter. She was mine, and no matter what Margaret or Claire tried to do, I wasn't going to let them take her away. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, just a few weeks after Sophie was born. Ryan had taken her for a short walk in her stroller to give me a moment to rest, and I was curled up on the couch when I heard voices outside. I peeked through the window and saw my mother standing in the driveway with my cousin Hannah. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. "She's an unfit mother," Margaret said sharply. You should see the way she clings to that baby, like she's afraid to let anyone else hold her. Sophie will be better off with Claire. She'll have a real family then. My breath caught in my throat. Unfit mother? Because I wouldn't hand over my newborn like a shared toy? My hands started trembling, the anger rising so fast I felt dizzy. Before I could go outside to confront her, Margaret spotted me in the window and walked off with Hannah, pretending nothing happened. I was still shaking when Ryan came back, but I didn't even have time to tell him what I'd heard before another knock sounded at the door. It was Claire, and she wasn't alone. She was holding a manila envelope. I think it's time we make this official, she said, stepping inside like she owned the place. She placed the papers on the table, sliding them toward me. It's a petition for guardianship. If we start now, it will be less messy later. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The audacity of it was so overwhelming that my brain couldn't keep up. When the words finally came, they were loud enough to make Sophie stir in her stroller. Are you out of your mind? I shouted, my voice cracking. You are not taking my daughter. Get out of my house. Claire's face crumpled into a fake, wounded expression. Emily, I'm just trying to give her a better life. You promised. Don't you dare bring that up again. I snapped, stepping toward her. That was never a promise to give you my child. Margaret appeared in the doorway a moment later, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was the problem. You're making a huge mistake, she said coldly. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. The mistake was letting either of you near her in the first place. Ryan came in from the kitchen then, eyes narrowing when he saw the paperwork. Out, he said simply. Now. They both huffed, muttered insults under their breath, and finally left. The door clicked shut, and I felt like my knees might give out. Ryan put a hand on my shoulder. We should cut them off completely. I wanted to agree, but a small part of me still felt that familiar sting of guilt, the fear of being the bad daughter. That night, as Sophie slept peacefully in her crib, I stared at her tiny face and made a silent promise. I would never forgive them, and I would make sure they regretted ever trying to take her from me. After the day they showed up with guardianship papers, I knew this wasn't going to stop on its own. Every instinct I had as a mother told me that if I didn't take action now, they would find a way to take Sophie from me. I decided to stop reacting and start preparing. The next morning, while Sophie napped, I started a journal. I wrote down every interaction I'd had with Margaret and Claire since Sophie's birth. The surprise visits, the rumors they spread, the way they tried to take her at the hospital. Every date, every word I could remember went on those pages. A few days later, I scheduled a meeting with a local attorney, a woman named Jessica who specialized in family law. Sitting in her office, with Sophie's car seat beside me, I poured out the whole story. She listened quietly, her expression growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, she leaned forward. If they're actively trying to undermine your parental rights, you need proof. Not hearsay, solid, undeniable evidence. That night, I told Ryan what Jessica had said, and he agreed. It felt strange to even think about secretly recording my own family, but at this point, they weren't acting like family anymore. The first opportunity came when Margaret showed up unannounced again. I had my phone recording before I even opened the door. She stepped inside and immediately started in on. You can't give that child the life she deserves, Emily, she said in that cold, patronizing tone. Claire will raise her right. You're being stubborn and selfish. I kept my voice calm, though inside I was shaking. That's not your decision to make, Mom. But I knew I had exactly what I needed, her own voice, admitting she thought Sophie should be taken from. A week later, Claire called, asking if she could stop by to talk. My gut told me it wouldn't be a friendly conversation, so I was ready. As soon as she walked in, she went straight to the point. I don't care if you hate me forever, she said, her eyes cold. That baby is mine. She's always been mine. It took everything in me not to explode right there, but I forced myself to nod like I was listening, just to keep her talking. When she left, Ryan and I sat on the couch together, listening to both recording. Hearing their voices say those things out loud made my stomach turn. This is it, Ryan said quietly, his arm around my shoulders. We have them. I nodded, but the truth was it still hurt. They weren't just trying to steal my baby. They were tearing apart the family I thought I had. Still, for Sophie's sake, I knew we had to keep going, no matter how much it broke us in the process. I knew I needed more than a couple of short clips if I wanted to shut this down for good. The attorney had told me that the stronger my evidence, the harder it would be for them to twist the story in their favor. So I decided to set a trap. A few days later, I called my mother. I kept my voice soft, almost hesitant, like I was ready to be reasonable. I told her I wanted to talk things through, that maybe we could find a solution everyone could live with. Predictably, she jumped at the chance. Within minutes, she was telling me she'd bring Claire. The afternoon they arrived, I made sure Sophie was upstairs with Ryan, so they couldn't distract or manipulate me by using her. Before I even opened the door, I had my phone hidden in my pocket, recording. Margaret walked in first, her smile just a little too wide, Claire right behind her with that eager, almost expectant look. We sat in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. "I'm glad you came to your senses," Margaret began, settling into her chair like she was presiding over a meeting. "We can end this unpleasantness without dragging it through the courts." "What exactly do you mean?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral while my thumb tapped my phone, ensuring the recorder was still running. She folded her hands and spoke slowly, as if explaining to a child. "You'll sign over parental rights to Claire. Quietly. No one outside the family has to know. That way, we avoid scandal, and Sophie grows up in a stable home with parents who can give her everything she needs." It was the way she said parents, like she wasn't even acknowledging me, that made my stomach churn. Claire leaned forward, her voice soft but brimming with excitement. "Mark and I have already set up the nursery. We bought the crib, toys, everything she'll ever need. We can take her home as soon as the papers are signed." I swallowed hard, pretending to think it over. Inside, my hands itched to throw them out on the spot. "And what happens if I say no?" I asked. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll have to do this the hard way. And trust me, Emily, you don't want that." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. Meanwhile, the recorder captured every single word. The coercion, the plan, the proof that they weren't just overstepping, they were plotting to steal my child. When they finally left, satisfied that I was thinking about it, I closed the door and leaned against it, my knees weak. Ryan came down, and I told him everything they'd said. "We've got them now," I whispered, my voice shaking, not from fear this time, but from the knowledge that their own words were about to destroy their plan. Emily sat across from her lawyer, the small black recorder resting between them like a weapon of quiet justice. She pressed play, and the office filled with Margaret's cold, calculated voice. "You can't give that child the life she deserves. Claire will raise her right." Her lawyer's eyebrows rose, but he didn't interrupt. The next recording played, and Claire's voice followed, sharp, entitled, almost triumphant. "I don't care if she hates me forever. That baby is mine." The attorney leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. "Emily, this isn't just family interference. This is a coordinated attempt to take your child. We're going to court." Within hours, he had prepared the paperwork. The legal strike was swift and precise. Petitions for restraining orders against both Margaret and Claire, accompanied by the damning audio file. Emily felt her hands trembling as she signed each page, her pen scratching across the paper like the final strokes of a battle map. When the court date was set for the following week, word spread through the family like wildfire. Margaret, true to form, began making calls, frantic, manipulative calls, trying to sway relatives to her side. She painted Emily as unstable, claiming she was emotionally unfit, and that Claire was only stepping in to protect Sophie. But the tide had shifted. Too many had seen Margaret's controlling ways over the years, and their support was thin. On the morning of the hearing, Emily walked into the courthouse with Ryan at her side. He squeezed her hand before they entered the courtroom, his silent promise echoing louder than any words. "I'm here. We're doing this together." The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone, listened intently as Emily's lawyer played the recordings. The sound of Margaret's condescending instructions and Claire's cold declaration filled the room. Gasps rippled through the small audience of onlookers, mostly distant relatives and curious locals who had heard whispers of the family feud. When the recordings ended, the judge set her pen down. Her gaze locked on Margaret and Claire, who sat stiffly at the defense table, their faces pale and tight. "What I've just heard is deeply disturbing," the judge said, her voice firm. "These statements show not only an intent to interfere with a mother's rights, but also a willingness to emotionally harm both her and her child." The ruling came swiftly. Both Margaret and Claire were to have no contact whatsoever with Sophie until she reached the age of 18. Any violation would result in immediate legal consequence. Emily exhaled a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It wasn't just a win, it was a shield, one that would protect Sophie from the grasping hands of entitlement and control. As they left the courthouse, Ryan wrapped an arm around her. "You did it," he said softly. Emily looked at him, then down at the paperwork in her hand. No, they had done it, and Sophie's future was now firmly, undeniably. Emily wasn't just content with winning in court. She wanted them to feel the sting every time they thought about her daughter. The family heirlooms sat in her attic, dusty but valuable. Margaret's grandmother's pearl necklace, a set of antique silver cutlery, and an oil painting Claire had always boasted would look perfect in my dining room one day. For years, Emily had ignored them, thinking they were sentimental relics. Now they were ammunition. She met with an appraiser in secret. The man's eyes widened as he examined the pearls. "These are worth a fortune," he murmured, jotting down numbers that made Emily's heart race. Within weeks, the heirlooms were gone, sold discreetly to collectors across the country. The lump sum was transferred into a trust fund under Sophie's name, locked away until she turned 21. Emily smiled as she signed the papers. Every cent would ensure Sophie's education, freedom, and independence. Then came Christmas. Emily knew Margaret loved sending out family newsletters, and Claire obsessed over posting perfectly curated holiday photos online. So Emily chose the moment carefully. She dressed Sophie in a beautiful velvet dress, the very one Claire had purchased years ago, smugly imagining her future daughter wearing it. Sophie, now older, had no idea of the history, only that she felt like a princess. Emily took a picture by the tree, Sophie beaming, her curls falling around her shoulders, clutching a new stuffed bunny. On the back of the photo, Emily wrote in her neatest, most deliberate handwriting, "She's not yours. She never will be." She slipped the photo into separate envelopes for Margaret and Claire, each accompanied by a return address they would immediately recognize. The fallout was swift. Claire's social media, once filled with smiling selfies and home renovations, went silent for weeks. But silence didn't mean surrender. By New Year's, Emily received notice. Claire was filing for an appeal. The arrogance still burned bright. She still thought she could take Sophie. The hearing was short and brutal. Emily's lawyer played the original recordings again, this time louder, so the court could hear every icy word Claire had spoken. The judge barely looked up when denying the appeal. Claire left the courthouse with her head down, paparazzi catching her red-eyed and furious. That night, Emily poured herself a glass of wine, the Christmas tree still twinkling in the corner. She glanced at Sophie playing on the floor and thought of Margaret and Claire staring at that photo, knowing the girl in it was untouchable to them forever. This wasn't just victory. This was closure, wrapped in velvet and tied with the kind of bow that cut deep. Snow was falling gently outside the large bay window of their new home, the glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the frost. Emily sat curled on the couch, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands, her eyes drifting toward Sophie's bedroom door. For the first time in years, her heart felt still. No pounding dread, no constant calculation about what Margaret or Claire might try next. Just peace. It had been 6 months since the court's final ruling. 6 months since the judge's gavel came down, silencing Margaret's icy demands and Claire's smug entitlement. Emily and Ryan had packed up their little world, Sophie's crib, her stuffed animals, and the trust fund paperwork, and moved to a quiet suburb 2 hours away. The neighbors were kind, the streets were safe, and no one here knew the tangled mess of the past. Sophie was thriving. She had learned to walk, her tiny feet padding across the hardwood floors as she chased the family cat. She laughed easily now, a sound that seemed to heal wounds Emily thought would never close. Ryan often came home early from work, eager to scoop Sophie up and spin her around the living room, both of them giggling until they collapsed on the rug. Sometimes, though, when the house grew quiet, Emily found herself replaying everything. Margaret's condescending smirk across the table, Claire's greedy eyes as she spoke about Sophie like she was property, the way they had underestimated her, assuming the quiet daughter-in-law would fold under pressure. But she hadn't folded, she had fought. And in winning, she'd learned something important. Revenge wasn't just about watching someone lose. It was about protecting what was yours, making sure the people you loved could grow without fear. On Sophie's dresser sat a small silver frame, a photo from that Christmas card she'd sent to Margaret and Claire. Sophie in the pale blue dress Claire had once bought, grinning as if she knew the power in her mother's message. She's not yours. She never will be. Emily hadn't heard from them since the court upheld the restraining orders. The silence was worth more than any heirloom. Tonight, Ryan was in the kitchen finishing dinner, humming softly. The scent of roasted rosemary chicken drifted through the house. Emily stood, padding quietly to Sophie's room. She eased the door open, smiling at the sight of her daughter curled under a quilt, her little fist tucked beneath her cheek. Sophie's breath was slow and even, her world blissfully untouched by the chaos that had once threatened to swallow them whole. Emily reached out, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with fierce, unshakable love. "I promise," she whispered into the dark, "no one will ever take you from me." And with that vow, she turned off the light, closing the door on the past forever. Do you believe Emily was right to cut all ties and start fresh? Or should she have given her family another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.